My name is Lena Carter, and for the longest time, I believed that hard work always paid off. I was the kind of person who stayed late at the office, even when nobody asked me to. The kind who triple-checked every report, fixed mistakes that weren't even mine, and still showed up the next morning looking like I had everything under control, even when I didn't. I wore that go-getter mindset like a badge of honor, because in my world, there was always a finish line, a goal, a next step. And for the past 3 years, that next step had been one thing, a promotion. Not just for the title or the money, but for the recognition. The proof that everything I sacrificed, my time, my energy, my personal life, actually meant something. And honestly, I believed I was close, really close. But before we go any further, real quick, if you're listening to this right now, put on your headset. Trust me, it makes a difference, especially with the soft river sounds flowing in the background. It's subtle, but it pulls you right into the story. And while you're settling in, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. All right, let me take you back to the exact moment everything started to change. It began with something simple, an invitation. My boss, Mr. Harrison Blake, asked me out to lunch. Now, this wasn't unusual. We had meetings all the time. But this felt different. There was something about the way he said it. Calm, direct, almost intentional. And the place he chose? Definitely not casual. It was one of those high-end restaurants in downtown Chicago. The kind where the lighting is dim, the music is soft, and every detail feels carefully designed to impress. The kind of place you don't go to unless something important is about to happen. And in my mind, something important was about to happen. Because what else could it be? After everything I'd done, every late night, every successful campaign, every impossible deadline I managed to hit, this had to be it. The conversation, the promotion, the moment where all of it finally paid off. I remember standing in front of my mirror before leaving my apartment, adjusting my blazer over and over again, not because it didn't look right, but because I needed to feel ready. You ever have that feeling? Like everything you've been working toward is finally within reach, but you're scared to mess it up somehow? Yeah, that was me. When I arrived, I noticed him immediately. Already seated, calm, composed, observing the room like he was always one step ahead of everyone else. "Lena," he said, giving me a small nod as I approached. Right on time. I smiled politely and took my seat, trying to keep my nerves under control. From the outside, I probably looked confident, but inside, my heart was racing. Then the conversation started. At first, everything felt perfect. He brought up my recent campaign, the one I had poured everything into, weeks of stress, late nights, endless revisions, and he noticed. "You've been doing exceptional work," he said. And in that moment, everything around me seemed to fade. The noise, the people, even the tension I was carrying. Because that sentence, that was what I had been waiting for. Recognition, validation, proof that I was finally being seen. I nodded, trying to stay professional, but inside, I was already imagining what came next. The promotion, the new title, the next chapter. But then, something shifted. It was small at first, almost unnoticeable. The way he leaned back in his chair, the slight pause before he spoke again, the way his eyes locked onto mine just a little longer than before, and then his tone changed. Not dramatically, just enough for me to feel it. And suddenly, that excitement in my chest, it didn't feel the same anymore. It started turning into something heavier, something uncertain, like my instincts were trying to warn me before my mind could catch up. I didn't understand it yet. I couldn't explain it. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. And that lunch? It wasn't going to be what I expected, not even close. Because what happened next was the moment everything I believed about success, loyalty, and trust started to fall apart. At first, I tried to ignore that feeling. You know, that quiet voice in your head telling you something isn't right, but you push it aside because everything looks fine on the surface. Yeah, that one. So I smiled, nodded, played along, because this was still my boss, and this was still my moment. The waiter came by, and without even asking me, Mr. Harrison Blake started ordering. Not just for himself, for both of us. Appetizers I'd never heard of. Premium steak, imported wine, each item sounding more expensive than the last. I remember letting out a small, awkward laugh. Wow. We're celebrating something big today, huh? He didn't laugh back. He just gave a small smile. You could say that. Something about the way he said it didn't feel like celebration. It felt like setup. But I brushed it off again because the conversation kept flowing. He asked about my long-term goals, my vision for the company, how I saw myself growing within the organization. And I answered everything, confidently, carefully. Like this was an interview I had been preparing for my entire life. And honestly, I nailed it. I could see it in his expression. That look of approval, that quiet acknowledgement that I was exactly who they needed. Then, as the plates were cleared and the table fell into a brief silence, he leaned back in his chair, slowly, casually, like he had all the time in the world. "Lena," he said, and the way he said my name this time, it was different, heavier. "You've done everything right." My heart started pounding. This was it. I could feel it. "But," he continued, and just like that, everything inside me tightened. "There's one more thing." I swallowed. "Okay." He folded his hands on the table, looking directly at me. "To move forward in this company, you need to prove your loyalty." Loyalty. The word hung in the air like it meant more than it should. I frowned slightly. "I'm not sure I understand." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached down, picked up the check, and gently slid it across the table toward me. "Cover this," he said calmly. For a second, I thought he was joking. I even let out a small laugh. But he didn't laugh. He didn't smile. He just looked at me, waiting. And that's when it hit me. He was serious. I slowly picked up the bill, my fingers suddenly feeling heavier than they should. And when I saw the total, my stomach dropped. $450. $450. For one lunch. My mind started racing. That was a huge chunk of my paycheck. Not something you just casually spend, especially not on a meal you didn't even choose. I looked back up at him, trying to process what was happening. "Mr. Blake, I didn't expect." He cut me off with a small wave of his hand. "Think of it as an investment." Investment. The word echoed in my head, but it didn't sit right. Not at all. "In your future," he added, and there it was. Clear as day, this wasn't a gesture. This wasn't normal. This was pressure, manipulation, a test I never agreed to take. I felt something rise in my chest. Anger, sharp, immediate, uncomfortable, but at the same time, fear. Because this man, he controlled my career, my future in this company, everything I had been working toward, and he knew it. The silence between us stretched longer. He didn't say another word. He didn't need to. The message was already clear. pay or walk away from everything. My fingers tightened around my purse. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about respect, boundaries, and how far I was willing to go just to move one step higher. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears as I slowly reached inside my bag. And in that moment, I realized something that made my chest feel even heavier. This wasn't the opportunity I thought it was. This was a trap. And somehow, I had already stepped right into it. For a few seconds, I just sat there, frozen, staring at that number like it might suddenly change if I blinked enough times. $450. It didn't feel real. It shouldn't have been my responsibility. And yet, there it was, sitting right in front of me, waiting, just like he was. I slowly looked up at Mr. Harrison Blake, still calm, still composed, like this was the most normal thing in the world, like he hadn't just crossed a line that should never be crossed. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't about loyalty. This was about control. He wanted to see how far I'd go, how much I'd tolerate, how easily I could be pushed before I pushed back. My chest tightened. Because the worst part? He had put me in a position where saying no didn't feel like an option. Not without consequences. Not without risking everything I had worked for. I could already hear his voice in my head. Careers have a funny way of ending when people become difficult. I hadn't even heard him say it yet. But somehow, I knew. This was that kind of man. The kind who smiles while testing how much power he has over you. The kind who calls manipulation an opportunity. My fingers trembled slightly as I reached into my purse. I hated this. Every second of it. But I also knew something else. This moment, I wouldn't forget it. Not ever. I pulled out my credit card slowly, placing it on the small black folder, like it weighed more than it should. And as I did, something inside me shifted. Not fear, not hesitation. Something colder, quieter, more controlled. Anger. The kind that doesn't explode right away. The kind that waits, plans, remembers. The waiter came, took the card, and walked away like nothing unusual had happened. Like this wasn't completely wrong. And maybe to him, it wasn't. Because from the outside, it probably just looked like a normal business lunch. But it wasn't. Not even close. When the receipt came back, I didn't hesitate. I signed it. Quickly. Neatly. Like I was closing a deal. But in reality, I was marking the beginning of something else. Something he didn't see coming. I slid the receipt back and looked up at him. For the first time since this whole thing started, I didn't feel nervous anymore. I didn't feel excited either. I just felt clear. Done? I said calmly. He nodded, satisfied. Good, he replied. That's the kind of commitment I like to see. Commitment. I almost laughed, but I didn't, because now I understood something he didn't realize yet. This wasn't a sign of my loyalty. It was a record of his mistake. We stood up shortly after. The lunch was over. The test was complete. And as we walked out of that restaurant, I noticed how normal everything looked. People laughing, waiters moving between tables, soft music playing in the background. Like nothing had just happened. Like my entire perception of my boss hadn't just been shattered in under an hour. Outside, the air felt different, cooler, sharper. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Well, he said, adjusting his jacket. We'll talk soon about next steps. Next steps. I nodded. Of course. But in my mind, I was already somewhere else. 'Cause this wasn't over. Not even close. If anything, this was just the beginning. As I walked away from him, my heels clicking against the pavement, one thought kept repeating in my head, over and over again. You really think that was loyalty? No. That was humiliation. That was manipulation. And more than anything, that was a mistake. Because he underestimated me, he thought I'd just accept it. Move on. Stay quiet. But he didn't know me as well as he thought he did. I wasn't just someone who worked hard. I was someone who paid attention. Someone who remembered details, patterns, shifts in behavior, and that uneasy feeling I had earlier, it wasn't gone. If anything, it was stronger now, because deep down, I knew this wasn't the worst thing he had done, not even close. And if he was bold enough to do something like this in public, then what was he doing behind closed doors? That question stayed with me the entire ride home. It followed me into my apartment, sat with me in the silence, and that night, as I stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep, I made a decision. I wasn't going to quit. I wasn't going to run. And I definitely wasn't going to let him win. If he wanted loyalty, he was about to see something very different. Because what I felt right now wasn't loyalty. It was the beginning of something far more dangerous. Something he never saw coming. The next few days felt strangely normal. And that was the unsettling part. I went back to work, answered emails, led meetings, reviewed campaigns, smiled at coworkers like nothing had changed. Like I hadn't just paid $450 to prove loyalty to a man I no longer trusted. And him? Mr. Harrison Blake acted like it never even happened. No mention of the lunch, no follow-up about the promotion, nothing. Just business as usual. But something about that silence felt intentional, like he was waiting, watching, measuring something I couldn't fully see yet. Still, I didn't confront him, not yet, because deep down, I had a feeling. That wasn't the end of it, and I was right. 3 days later, I got the message. Come to my office. Urgent. Short. Direct. No explanation. My stomach tightened the second I read it. That same uneasy feeling from the lunch came rushing back. But this time, it was heavier. Darker. I stood up from my desk, trying to keep my composure as I walked down the hallway. Each step felt louder than usual, like I was walking into something I couldn't turn back from. When I reached his door, it was already slightly open. Come in, his voice called out from inside, calm, controlled, just like always. I stepped in and immediately noticed something different. His desk, covered in documents, stacks of paper, neatly arranged, but excessive. Too much for a normal meeting. Close the door, he said without looking up. That was the first moment my instincts really started screaming. I did it anyway. The soft click of the door shutting behind me felt final, like I had just stepped into a space where things worked differently. Sit, he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. I sat down slowly, my eyes scanning the papers. Numbers, reports, financial statements. At first glance, everything looked standard, but something about it didn't feel right. He finally looked up at me, sliding a thick stack of documents across the desk. I need your signature on these, he said. Simple. Direct. Too simple. I frowned slightly, picking up the top page. Right now? I asked. Right now, he repeated. No hesitation, no explanation, just expectation. I started flipping through the pages, scanning the numbers out of habit. And that's when I saw it. A discrepancy. Small at first, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention, but I kept reading. Another one, and another, and then it became impossible to ignore. These weren't minor errors. These were deliberate changes, inflated numbers, shifted figures, data that didn't match previous reports I had personally worked on. My heartbeat started picking up, slow at first, then faster. I looked up at him, trying to keep my voice steady. "Mr. Blake, these figures don't match the original reports." He didn't react, not even a flicker. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, just like he did at the restaurant, calm, unbothered, like he had been expecting this exact moment. "They've been adjusted," he said. Adjusted. The word landed heavy, too casual for something this serious. I stared at him, waiting for him to clarify, to explain, to say something that would make this make sense. But he didn't. Instead, he held my gaze and added, "It's a formality." A formality? My grip tightened slightly on the papers. "This isn't a formality," I said carefully. "This is financial reporting. These numbers, Lena." He cut me off, not loudly, but firmly. Enough to remind me who was in control of this room. "Just sign the documents." There it was. No explanation, no justification, just pressure. Clear, direct, unavoidable. My mind started racing. This wasn't just unethical. This was illegal. And he knew it. Which meant he also knew exactly what he was asking me to do. I felt that same anger from the lunch rising again. But this time, it wasn't quiet. It wasn't controlled. It was sharper, more urgent. Because now, this wasn't about money. This was about my integrity, my career, my future. I placed the papers down slowly, meeting his eyes. "I can't sign this," I said. The room went still. For a split second, everything felt frozen. And then, his expression changed. The calm mask slipped, just enough for something darker to show through. Something colder, more dangerous. "You should think very carefully about your answer," he said quietly. No smile, no warmth, just a warning. And suddenly, the air in the room felt heavier, like it was pressing down on me. "You're asking me to approve something that isn't accurate," I replied, my voice steady but firm. "I can't do that." His eyes narrowed slightly, and that's when I saw it. The shift. The real version of him, not the composed leader, not the fair boss I thought I knew. For a moment, I just sat there, looking at him, really looking at him, like I was seeing him for the first time, because the man sitting in front of me right now was not the same person I had respected for the past 3 years. This wasn't about leadership anymore. This wasn't about performance or growth or opportunity. This was about power and how far he could push it. Careers have a funny way of ending when people become difficult. His words lingered in the air, heavy and deliberate. Not loud, not aggressive, but sharp enough to cut straight through any illusion I had left. I felt my chest tighten, but not from fear. Not anymore. Something had shifted inside me, because now I understood exactly what this was. A setup. Not just the lunch, not just the bill, but this, right here. He wasn't testing my loyalty. He was trying to pull me into something much bigger, something illegal, and if I said yes, I'd be tied to it, just like him. I slowly placed the documents back on his desk, carefully, deliberately. "I'm not signing those," I said again. This time, there was no hesitation in my voice, no uncertainty, just clarity. His jaw tightened slightly, a small reaction, but enough. "You're making a mistake, Lena." "Maybe," I replied, "but at least it's my mistake." The silence that followed was different. He wasn't trying to convince me anymore. He was evaluating me, like I had just moved from being an asset to being a problem. "Do you know how easy it is to replace someone in your position?" he asked casually. I didn't respond, because I already knew very easy. That promotion you've been working toward, he continued, gone. I felt a small sting in my chest, not because I was surprised, but because a part of me had still hoped he wouldn't go there. And not just here, he added, his voice dropping slightly. This industry is smaller than you think. There it was, the full picture. Not just a threat to my job, a threat to my future, my reputation, everything. I took a slow breath, forcing myself to stay steady. You can do whatever you think you need to do, I said quietly, but I'm not signing those documents. For a second, I thought he might explode, but he didn't. Instead, something colder happened. He smiled. Not a friendly smile, not even a fake one. The kind of smile that says, "This isn't over." "All right," he said, leaning back again. "We'll revisit this." Revisit? Like this was just a minor disagreement. Like he hadn't just tried to pull me into fraud. I stood up slowly. "Am I done here?" I asked. He nodded. "For now." For now. Those two words followed me all the way out of his office, down the hallway, back to my desk. And even as I sat down, staring at my screen, I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't going away. If anything, it was just beginning. The rest of the day felt like I was moving through fog. I answered emails, sat through meetings, nodded at the right moments, but my mind was somewhere else. Replaying everything, the lunch, the bill, the documents, the threat, piece by piece, over and over again, until one thought became impossible to ignore. This didn't start with me. There was no way I was the first person he had done this to. No way this was his first time manipulating reports. Which meant there had to be more. More documents, more inconsistencies, more proof. That thought didn't scare me. It focused me. Because suddenly, this wasn't just about defending myself anymore. This was about exposing him. That night, I didn't go out. I didn't relax. I didn't sleep early. Instead, I opened my laptop and started digging. Emails first. Every conversation I had ever had with him, every instruction, every file he had ever sent me. At first it was subtle, small wording changes, vague requests. Adjust this. Rework that. Let's present it differently. Normal enough. On the surface. But now, with everything I knew, it looked different. It felt different. Then I started comparing reports. Old ones. New ones. Versions that should have matched, but didn't. And that's when I saw it. The pattern. Numbers slightly altered. Figures shifted just enough to avoid attention. But consistent. Intentional. Careful. Too careful to be a mistake. My heart started racing again, but this time, it wasn't fear. It was certainty. He had been doing this for a while, and somehow, no one had caught him. Or worse, no one had spoken up. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen, the glow of the laptop reflecting in my eyes. And for the first time since all of this started, I felt something different. Not anger, not fear, not even stress. Control. Because now, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was preparing, quietly, carefully, patiently. If he thought I was just going to walk away or stay silent, he was wrong, very wrong. That night turned into the next morning. And somehow, I was still sitting in front of my laptop. Same position, same focus, different mindset. Because now, I wasn't just reviewing files anymore. I was investigating. Every email, every report, every version history I could access. I went deeper than I ever had before. And the more I looked, the more things stopped making sense. At first, it was small inconsistencies. Numbers that didn't line up across different reports. tiny adjustments that could easily go unnoticed if you weren't actively searching for them. But I was. And once you see a pattern, you can't unsee it. I started documenting everything: dates, file names, changes. I created a private folder on my personal drive, something completely separate from the company system, because one thing was already clear. I couldn't trust the environment I was working in. Not anymore. Then came the emails. I searched for specific keywords: adjust, revise, final version, confidential. Dozens of threads popped up. Some of them looked harmless. Others, not so much. There were moments where his wording shifted just enough to avoid direct responsibility. He never explicitly said, "Change the numbers." He was smarter than that. Instead, it was always something like, "Let's align this with projected expectations." Or, "This version may need slight recalibration before final submission." Careful, calculated, always leaving room for deniability. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my eyes. He had been doing this for a long time, long enough to perfect it, long enough to make it look normal, but it wasn't, not even close. And then I found something that made my stomach drop. A report from nearly a year ago, one I had briefly worked on, but wasn't fully responsible for. At the time, I didn't think much of it. But now, looking at it again, the numbers were completely different from the final version that had been submitted. Not slightly off, completely altered. And the difference? Huge. We weren't talking about minor adjustments anymore. This was serious money. Money that had to go somewhere. My pulse started to rise. Because now, this wasn't just manipulation. This was something bigger, something deeper, and way more dangerous. I quickly cross-referenced the data with other reports from the same period. And that's when it clicked. It wasn't random, it was systematic. Money being moved, reallocated, hidden under layers of adjustments, all pointing back to one place: him. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding harder than before. "Okay," I whispered to myself. "Okay, this is real." For a moment, I just sat there, letting it sink in, because what I was looking at could take him down completely, but only if I handled it right, carefully, precisely, no mistakes. That's when I made my next decision. I needed more than documents. I needed proof that couldn't be explained away, something direct, something undeniable, which meant I had to start recording. The next day at work, everything felt different again, not on the surface. On the surface, I was still the same Lena, focused, professional, reliable, but underneath, I was watching everything, listening more closely, paying attention to every word he said, every instruction, every interaction. I even started carrying my phone differently, always within reach, always ready, because I knew it was only a matter of time before he brought it up again, and he did. 2 days later. "Lena, my office, same tone, same setup, but this time, I was ready." Before walking in, I quickly opened a voice recording app and slipped my phone into my blazer pocket. Hidden, silent, recording. "Close the door," he said again. Of course, I did. And just like before, the documents were already waiting on his desk. Except this time, there was no pretending. "No need to review everything again," he said. "Just sign where indicated. Straight to the point. No build-up, no subtlety." I stepped closer, keeping my expression neutral. "I told you before," I said carefully. "I'm not comfortable signing these." He sighed, leaning back, clearly irritated now. "Lena, you're overcomplicating this." "No," I replied. "I'm being careful." His eyes locked onto mine, and for a second, neither of us spoke. The tension in the room was thick, heavy. Then he leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. "This is how things work at this level," he said. "You don't get ahead by questioning every detail." There it was, not even trying to hide it anymore. You get ahead by knowing when to cooperate. Cooperate. My jaw tightened slightly, because now I had exactly what I needed. His words, his pressure, his intent, captured, clear, real. I took a small step back. "I can't do that," I said. This time there was no explanation, no justification, just a boundary. By the time I left his office that day, I already knew one thing for sure. This wasn't going to end quietly. Not for him, not anymore. Because now I had something he didn't realize I had. Proof. Not just assumptions, not just patterns, but his own words. His pressure, his intent, recorded. And that changed everything. But having evidence and using it, those were two very different things. I couldn't just walk into HR and say, "Hey, my boss is committing fraud," not without risking everything. Because if I made one wrong move, if my claim couldn't be backed up properly, it wouldn't just fail. It would backfire. And someone like him, he wouldn't hesitate to destroy my career to protect himself. So I needed to be smart, careful, strategic. That night, I sat in my apartment again, staring at my laptop. But this time, I wasn't just gathering information. I was building a case. I organized everything: emails, reports, recorded conversations, each file labeled, time-stamped, cross-referenced, like pieces of a puzzle slowly coming together. And the more I connected them, the clearer the picture became. This wasn't a one-time thing. It wasn't even recent. This had been going on for years. Money moving through different accounts. Numbers adjusted just enough to pass under the radar. And him. Always in the center of it. Careful. Precise. Untouchable. Or at least, that's what he thought. I leaned back, exhaling slowly. Okay. If I'm going to do this, I whispered to myself, I have to do it right. Because this wasn't just about exposing him. This was about protecting myself in the process. And that meant one thing. I couldn't be the face of the accusation. Not at first. So I made a decision. Anonymous. The next morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. The building was quiet, almost empty. Perfect. I logged into my computer, my fingers hovering over the keyboard for a moment. This was it. The first move. No going back after this. I opened a new email. Not from my work account, not from anything traceable to me. A completely separate, secure account I had created the night before. Then I started typing. Carefully, every word mattered. I kept it professional, neutral, focused on facts, not emotions. I didn't accuse anyone directly, didn't mention names. Instead, I highlighted discrepancies, patterns in financial reports, inconsistencies that warranted investigation, enough to raise concern, enough to trigger attention, but not enough to point back to me. I attached a few key documents, not everything, just enough to open the door, to make them look deeper. Because once they did, they would find the rest. I read the email 3 times before sending it, checking for tone, for mistakes, for anything that could give me away. My heart was pounding, because this was the moment everything started shifting. I hovered over the send button. For a second, I hesitated. Not because I doubted what I was doing, but because I knew what it meant. Once this was out there, things would move fast, unpredictably, and there would be no controlling it. But then I remembered the lunch, the bill, the pressure, the threat. And just like that, The hesitation disappeared. I clicked send. The email was gone. Out there. In the system, in motion, and just like that. The game had changed. The rest of the day felt strange. Normal on the outside, but underneath, something was shifting. I could feel it, like a quiet tension in the air that no one else seemed to notice yet. Meetings went on as usual. Emails kept coming in. People laughed, talked, complained about deadlines, but I wasn't fully there. Because in the back of my mind, I kept wondering, when would it start? When would someone notice? When would it reach him? And then, 2 days later, it happened. I walked into the office that morning and immediately felt it. Something was off, subtle, but undeniable. People were quieter, more focused. There were whispers, side conversations that stopped when someone walked by, and then I saw it. 2 people from internal audit, walking straight past my desk, heading toward his office. My heartbeat instantly picked up. That was fast. Faster than I expected. I kept my eyes on my screen, pretending to work, but my attention was locked on everything happening around me. Minutes later, his office door closed, and it stayed closed for a long time, longer than any normal meeting. The tension in the office slowly grew. You could feel it, like everyone knew something was happening, but no one knew exactly what. And as I sat there, quietly typing, acting like everything was normal, I felt something I hadn't felt in days. Not fear, not anger, anticipation, because this was just the beginning, the first crack. And once a crack like this starts to form, it doesn't stop. The shift in the office didn't go away. If anything, it got worse. Over the next few days, the energy changed completely. People started talking in lower voices. Meetings felt shorter, colder, and there was this quiet tension in the air, like everyone could feel something happening, but no one wanted to say it out loud. Internal audit didn't just come once, they kept coming back. Different people, different times, always serious, always focused, and always heading to the same place, his office. Mr. Harrison Blake still walked around like everything was under control. Same posture, same confident stride, same calm tone in meetings. But now that I knew what to look for, I could see the cracks. Small ones, subtle, but real. The way he checked his phone more often, the way his jaw tightened when someone mentioned numbers or reports, the way he paused, just a little too long, before answering certain questions. He was feeling it. Pressure. And for the first time since all of this started, he wasn't the one in control anymore. But I didn't react. I didn't look at him differently. I didn't give anything away. Because the most important part of all this was staying invisible. Just another employee, doing her job, uninvolved, unaware. At least, that's what it looked like. But behind the scenes, things were moving fast. Faster than I expected. I started noticing system restrictions. Certain financial files that were once easily accessible, now locked. Permissions changing overnight. Access logs being monitored more closely. They were digging deeper, which meant one thing. They had found something. And once auditors start finding real discrepancies, they don't stop. I kept working like nothing was happening. But every night, I went back to my apartment and kept building my file. Organizing, updating, strengthening everything I had. Because even though the investigation had started, I knew better than to assume it would end the right way. Not without pressure, not without resistance, not without him fighting back. And he did. A week into the investigation, things escalated. I was in a meeting with my team when I got a message. See me. Now. No name. But I didn't need one. I knew exactly who it was. My stomach tightened, but not like before. Not from fear, from awareness. Because now I understood the game we were playing, and I was ready for it. I walked to his office, every step steady, controlled. When I stepped inside, the energy hit me immediately. Different from before, sharper, more aggressive. The door closed behind me. And this time, he didn't ask me to sit. He was already standing, pacing slightly, which he never did, not before. That alone told me everything I needed to know. "You've been busy," he said without looking at me. My expression stayed neutral. "I've been working, yes." He stopped pacing, turned toward me slowly, his eyes locked onto mine, cold, searching. Internal audit seems to think there are inconsistencies in our reports. I didn't respond, didn't react, just listened. "They received an anonymous tip," he continued. There it was. The word hung in the air. Anonymous. I kept my face still. Careful. Measured. "I see," I said calmly. His eyes narrowed slightly, like he was trying to read something beneath the surface. "You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" he asked. There it was. The test. Direct this time. No subtlety, no games. I met his gaze without flinching. "No," I said. Simple. Clean. No extra words. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything before. Because now, we both knew. This wasn't just suspicion. This was a standoff. He took a slow step closer. Not too close, but enough to shift the space between us. "Funny," he said quietly. "Because these discrepancies, they line up very closely with projects you've worked on." There it was. The move, not proof, not accusation, pressure, trying to corner me, trying to make me react, but I didn't, because I had already prepared for this. "Then it's a good thing audit is reviewing everything," I replied evenly. "That's what they're there for." For a split second, something flickered in his expression. Not anger. Not yet. Surprise. Because that wasn't the answer he expected. He studied me for a moment longer. Then slowly, he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Be careful, Lena," he said. "Situations like this can get complicated very quickly." I held his gaze. "I'm aware." Another pause, another silent exchange, and then he stepped back, just slightly. "All right," he said. "That'll be all." Just like that. Conversation over. But the tension, still there, stronger than ever. I walked out of his office without rushing, without looking back. After that conversation, everything moved faster, way faster than I expected. The investigation was no longer quiet. It wasn't subtle anymore. It was visible, obvious, unavoidable. Internal audit wasn't just coming and going now. They had practically taken over an entire section of the office. Conference rooms were booked all day. Doors stayed closed. Voices stayed low. And the tension, it was everywhere. You could feel it in the air, like something big was about to happen, and everyone was just waiting for it to finally break. Even people who had nothing to do with finance could sense it. Whispers started spreading. "Something's wrong with the numbers." I heard audit is digging into last year's reports. Someone said there's a major discrepancy. Nobody knew the full story, but everyone knew something was off. And at the center of it all was him, Mr. Harrison Blake. At first, he tried to maintain control, kept showing up to meetings, kept giving instructions, kept acting like everything was under control. But it didn't last. Because now, people were watching him, not just casually, carefully. Managers started double-checking reports before sending them out. Executives began asking more detailed questions. Even small decisions suddenly required more approvals. The system was tightening around him, and there was no way out. A few days later, things escalated again. I was at my desk reviewing campaign data when I received an internal notification. Emergency board meeting, mandatory attendance for department leads. My heart skipped. This was it. This wasn't just audit anymore. This had reached the top. The boardroom was already half full when I walked in. Executives, senior managers, people who usually only appeared in quarterly meetings or major announcements. Serious faces, no small talk, no smiles, just tension. I took a seat quietly, keeping my expression neutral. And then he walked in. Mr. Harrison Blake. But this time, he didn't look the same, still composed on the outside. But the confidence? It wasn't as strong. The control? Not as firm. He took his seat at the far end of the table, avoiding eye contact with most people. That alone said everything. The meeting started quickly. No introductions, no warm-up. Straight to the point. One of the board members stood up, holding a folder. Over the past several days, he began, internal audit has uncovered multiple inconsistencies within our financial reporting. The room went completely silent. Every word landed heavier than the last. These inconsistencies are not isolated, he continued. They appear to follow a pattern across multiple quarters. A pattern. Exactly what I had seen. My hands stayed still on the table, but inside, my heart was pounding. Because now, it wasn't just my discovery, it was confirmed, official, real. The board member opened the folder, pulling out several documents, adjusted revenue figures, misallocated funds, and discrepancies that cannot be explained through standard accounting practices. There it was. No more vague language, no more assumptions. This was serious, very serious. And then he said something that changed everything. We have also identified a series of transactions linked to external accounts that do not belong to the company. External accounts. My chest tightened slightly, because that meant one thing. This wasn't just manipulation. This was embezzlement. Real money. Moved, hidden, stolen. A quiet wave of shock moved through the room. People shifting in their seats, exchanging glances, trying to process what they were hearing. And then, the board member turned slightly, looking directly at him. At this time, he said, we were placing Mr. Harrison Blake under formal investigation. There it was, out in the open. No more pretending, no more control, just reality. For a moment, no one moved, no one spoke. All eyes were on him. And for the first time since I had ever known him, he didn't have anything to say. No explanation, no defense, nothing. Just silence. And in that silence, everything collapsed. Security was called shortly after. Not aggressively, not dramatically, but firmly. Two individuals entered the room and approached him. Professional, calm, but unmistakable. This way, sir. That was it. No arguments, no resistance. He stood up slowly, adjusting his jacket like he was still trying to hold on to some level of control, but it was gone. Everyone in that room could see it. As he walked toward the door, he paused for just a second, and for a brief moment, his eyes met mine. It was quick, almost unnoticeable, but I saw it. And in that look, there was no confidence left, no authority, just something else, something darker, something bitter. Like he knew, not exactly how, but enough. Then he walked out. And just like that, it was over. After that meeting, nothing felt the same anymore. The office, once filled with routine, deadlines, and quiet ambition, had turned into something else entirely, a place of aftermath, of consequences, of truth finally catching up. People didn't talk as loudly, didn't joke as freely. Even the smallest conversations felt heavier because everyone knew. What had just happened wasn't small. It wasn't just a company issue. It was a scandal. And not just any scandal, a financial one. The kind that could destroy reputations, careers, entire organizations if handled wrong. But surprisingly, the company didn't fall apart. It adapted. Quickly. Decisively. Within days, official statements were released internally. Carefully worded, controlled, but clear enough. An ongoing investigation, financial misconduct, full cooperation with authorities, and most importantly, corrective action. Teams were restructured. Temporary leadership was assigned. New financial oversight protocols were introduced almost overnight. Everything became tighter, stricter, safer. And behind the scenes, the investigation kept going, deeper than before. Because what they had uncovered so far was only the surface. A week later, another internal update was sent out, this time more detailed. And what it revealed made everything even bigger. The missing funds? They weren't gone. Not completely. A significant portion had been traced, recovered, hidden in a series of offshore accounts, layered through transactions designed to make them hard to follow, but not impossible. Not anymore. And once the auditors had a starting point, they followed the trail all the way through. Every transaction, every movement, every attempt to hide it, unraveled, piece by piece, until there was nothing left to deny. The amount? Massive. Far beyond what anyone had initially suspected. We weren't talking about small manipulations anymore. We were talking about years of calculated theft. And suddenly, everything made sense. The pressure, the control, the way he operated. It was never just about power. It was about protecting what he had been doing all along, at the expense of everyone else, the company, the employees, people like me. But now, that chapter was over. And what surprised me the most was what came next. Instead of panic, there was momentum. The recovered funds were partially redirected. Bonuses were issued to employees, framed as both appreciation and stabilization. New projects were funded. Departments that had been under-resourced suddenly had what they needed. It was like the company was trying to rebuild trust as quickly as possible, and in a strange way, it worked. People started breathing again, smiling again, looking forward instead of over their shoulders. But for me, things were different, because I knew how close everything had come to going the other way, how easily I could have been pulled into it, how easily I could have been sitting on the opposite side of that investigation. That thought stayed with me, every day, quiet, but powerful. Then, one morning, I received an email, simple subject line, board meeting invitation, my name, specifically requested. My stomach tightened slightly, not from fear, but from anticipation, because I knew this wasn't random. When I walked into the boardroom this time, the atmosphere was completely different. No tension, no urgency, just focus, calm, purpose. The same people were there, board members, senior executives, but now they were looking at me, not past me, not around me, at me. "Lena," one of them said with a small nod, "please have a seat." I did, trying to stay composed, even though my mind was already racing. What was this about? Recognition? Questions? Something else? "We've reviewed your work over the past few years," another member began. My heart started to beat a little faster. "Your performance? Your consistency? And your conduct during the recent situation. Conduct. That word stood out. They knew, maybe not everything, but enough. You demonstrated integrity under pressure. He continued. That's something we value highly. I nodded slightly, not trusting myself to speak just yet. And because of that, he paused, just for a second, long enough to build the weight of what he was about to say. We'd like to offer you the position of Director of Marketing. There it was, the promotion, not just the one I had been working toward, but something even bigger, higher, faster, more than I expected. For a moment, everything went quiet, just like at the restaurant, just like when he said I was doing exceptional work. But this time, it felt different. Because this wasn't manipulation, this wasn't pressure, this was real, earned, clean. And yet, as I sat there, looking around the room, I didn't feel what I thought I would feel. For a moment, I just sat there, letting the offer settle in. Director of Marketing, the title I had been chasing. No, something even bigger than what I had imagined. A faster climb, a higher step, everything I thought I wanted, just handed to me. And yet, it didn't feel the way I expected. There was no rush, no excitement, no overwhelming sense of victory, just a quiet question in the back of my mind. Is this really what I want anymore? I looked around the room, at the board members, at the executives, people who now saw me differently, not just as an employee, but as someone they could trust, someone they could rely on, and that meant something. It really did. But at the same time, I couldn't ignore everything that had just happened. How close I had come to being part of something I didn't believe in. How easily ambition could be used against you. How quickly the line between success and compromise could blur. I took a slow breath, then another, and finally, I spoke. I really appreciate the offer, I said. My voice was calm, steady, even though I could feel the weight of the moment pressing in from all sides. It means a lot to be recognized like this. A few of them nodded, encouraging, expecting me to accept, but I didn't. Instead, I continued. But I don't think I'm the right person for this role. Silence. Immediate, heavy. I could feel the shift in the room. Confusion, surprise, a hint of disbelief. One of the board members leaned forward slightly. Can you elaborate? He asked. I nodded, carefully choosing my words. Over the past few weeks, I've had to make some difficult decisions, I said. And what I've realized is that leadership isn't just about performance. It's about perspective. They were listening, every word, focused. I've been in this department long enough to see where things worked and where they didn't, I continued. And I think right now, what this team needs isn't just someone who's driven. I paused briefly, then finished. It needs someone who's been overlooked. That caught their attention. I could see it. Someone who understands the system from a different angle, I added. Someone who's consistently delivered results without being recognized for it. Another pause. This time, intentional. Because now, I was about to say it. There's someone I'd like to recommend, I said. A few glances were exchanged around the table. His name is Daniel Reeves. The room went still again, not because they didn't know him, but because they did. I saw it in their reactions. Recognition, consideration. He's one of the most detail-oriented analysts in the department, I continued. He understands the data better than anyone I've worked with. And more importantly, he's honest. That word mattered. Now more than ever. He's been passed over multiple times, I added. Not because he wasn't capable, but because he wasn't visible. I leaned forward slightly, not aggressively, just enough to show I meant what I was saying. But if you're looking for someone who will lead with integrity, someone who won't cut corners, someone who actually understands how things should work, I met their eyes. He's your person. Silence filled the room again, but this time, it felt different. Not confused, not skeptical, thoughtful. One of the board members nodded slowly. Another flipped through some notes. A quiet discussion began between them. Low voices, focused, serious. I sat back, letting them talk. Not interrupting, not pushing. Because I had said what I needed to say. After a few moments, one of them looked back at me. "You're certain about this?" he asked. I didn't hesitate. Yes. No doubt. No second guessing, just certainty. Because this wasn't about giving something away. It was about putting it where it actually belonged. Another pause. Then finally, a decision. "We'll review his record immediately," the board member said. "But based on your recommendation, we're inclined to move forward." A small wave of relief moved through me. Not dramatic, not overwhelming, just right. Like something had fallen into place. "Thank you," I said quietly. The meeting wrapped up shortly after. No tension, no pressure, just a different kind of respect. The kind that isn't demanded, but earned. As I walked out of that room, I felt lighter. Not because I had turned something down, but because I had made a choice that actually aligned with who I was. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like a real win. But my story wasn't over yet. Because while everyone else saw this as the end of something, for me, it was just the beginning of something completely different. Walking out of that boardroom, I expected to feel something bigger, relief, excitement, maybe even a little bit of doubt, but instead, what I felt was something much simpler. Peace. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't chasing anything. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I wasn't calculating my next move just to stay ahead. I was just clear. Clear about what I wanted, and more importantly, what I didn't. The next few days passed quietly. The company moved forward. Leadership shifted, and just like that, Daniel Reeves was officially announced as the new director of marketing. And when I saw his reaction, that moment made everything worth it. The disbelief on his face, the way he kept asking if it was real, the quiet gratitude in his eyes when he looked at me across the room. That wasn't just a promotion. That was recognition, finally finding the right person. And somehow, that felt better than getting the role myself. As for me, I stayed, at least for a little while, long enough to help stabilize the team, to make sure everything transitioned smoothly, to leave things better than I found them. But deep down, I already knew this chapter of my life was ending because what I went through, it changed me. Not in a dramatic, overnight kind of way, but in a quiet, permanent one. I couldn't unsee what I'd seen. I couldn't go back to pretending everything worked the way it should. And most importantly, I couldn't ignore the idea that kept coming back to me over and over again. There are other companies out there going through the same thing, different names, different people, same patterns, same manipulation, same silence, and not everyone had the chance to push back. Not everyone had the evidence, not everyone had the voice. That thought stayed with me until one day it turned into a decision. I opened my laptop, not for work this time, but for something new, something mine, a blank document, a blank plan, a blank future, and at the top of the page, I typed 2 words, Integrity Shield. That was the name. Simple, direct. Exactly what I believed in now. A consultancy focused on one thing: helping companies detect, prevent, and expose financial fraud. No shortcuts, no compromises, just truth. Built on everything I had learned, everything I had experienced, everything I refused to ignore. The beginning wasn't easy. No safety net, no guaranteed income, no clear roadmap, just me, and a decision I had to commit to, fully, but slowly. Things started to move. One client turned into two, two turned into five. Referrals started coming in, word spread, because the reality was, this problem was more common than people wanted to admit, and I understood it from the inside. That made all the difference. And then something happened that felt almost unreal. One of my first major clients was my old company, the same place where everything started, the same place where everything fell apart, now asking me to help make sure it never happened again, full circle, in the most unexpected way. As I walked back into that building, this time not as an employee, but as a consultant, everything felt different. The pressure was gone, the fear was gone, the need to prove myself, gone. Because now, I wasn't there to climb anything. I was there to build something and protect something. Something that should have been there from the start. Integrity. Looking back now, what happened to me wasn't just about a bad boss or a toxic situation. It was a turning point, a test, not of loyalty, but of values. And the truth is, anyone can choose the easy path. Anyone can stay quiet. Anyone can go along with something they know is wrong just to get ahead. But the real question is, what happens when you don't? What happens when you say no? When you stand your ground, even when it costs you something? For me, it cost comfort. It cost certainty. It almost cost my career. But in the end, it gave me something far more valuable: control, purpose, and a life that actually feels like mine. So if you were in my position, what would you have done? Would you stay quiet or risk everything to do what's right? Because sometimes the real success story isn't the promotion you get. It's the moment you realize you don't need it anymore.